Then to conclude with just a few notes on the COVID-19 situation in our country at this moment and the responsibility of healthcare professionals in this regard. On the 15th of March 2020, COVID-19 was declared a national disaster, which is defined in Section 1 of the Disaster Management Act of 2002 as a progressive or sudden widespread or localized natural or human-caused occurrence which causes or threatens to cause death, injury or disease, damage to property, infrastructure or to the environment, or significant disruption of the life of a community, and is of a magnitude that exceeds the ability of those affected by the disaster to cope with its effects using only their own resources. Section 27(2) of the Disaster Management Act empowers the government to make regulations on, amongst others, the evacuation to temporary shelters of all or part of the population from the disaster-stricken or threatened area if such action is necessary for the preservation of life. The regulation of traffic to, from or within the disaster-stricken or threatened areas. The regulation of the movement of persons and goods to, from or within the disaster-stricken or threatened area. The control and occupancy of premises in the disaster-stricken or threatened area. Any other steps that may be necessary to prevent an escalation of the disaster or to alleviate, contain and minimize the effects of the disaster. Administrative measures that must be taken by employers is important to take note of. So if you are an employer or if you are an employee, to both it is very important to know the directives contained in this document. All employees need to be notified of this Occupational Health and Safety Directive and the manner of how it's going to be implemented. If employees are sick or showing symptoms associated with COVID, they must not work and they must take paid sick leave in terms of Section 22 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. A manager at the workplace must be appointed to address any concerns from the employees and to keep them informed. And the measures of this directive must be strictly complied with. The number of workers at the workplace must be minimized as far as practicable. For example, let them work on rotation or on shifts or remote working. Measures must also be taken to minimize contact between workers and between workers and members of the public. Information must be provided to the employees in the form of example leaflets and notices, information on COVID and the transmission thereof. If an employee is being diagnosed with COVID-19, you have to inform the Department of Health at the COVID-19 hotline, the number is supplied here, and investigate the cause and review risk assessment. Social distancing measures must be implemented and sanitizers and disinfectants being provided to your employees and to members of the public. Health and safety measures includes that there must be symptom screening. Screen your employer for fever, cough, sore throat, redness of eyes, shortness of breath. Employees have to report if they have any body aches, loss of smell or loss of taste, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, weakness and tiredness. If they do have symptoms, they must not come to work. If they are already at work, they must be isolated immediately and provide a FFP1 surgical mask and arrange transport for medical examination and testing as soon as possible. Also disinfect the area and the workstation where the worker has work. Refer workers at risk for screening and measures to prevent transmission. Place the employee on sick leave entitlement. If the sick leave of the worker is exhausted, make applications for an illness benefit in terms of Clause 4 of the directive issued on the 25th of March on the COVID-19 Temporary Employee Relief Scheme under Regulation 10(8) of the regulations in terms of Section 27(2) of the Disaster Management Act. Ensure that there is no discrimination against the employee, as in terms of Section 6 of the Employment Equity Act. If the employee has contracted COVID-19 due to occupational exposure, lodge a claim for compensation in terms of the Compensation of Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act in accordance with Notice 193 as published on the 3rd of March 2020. Only allow the employee back to work if the employee has undergone medical evaluation and being confirmed as negative. The employee will to adhere to all safety measures in the workplace, and the employee must be monitored closely for any symptoms. With regard to cloth masks, a minimum of 2 masks must be provided by the employer for the employee to wear at work and also when commuting. You must provide training on the correct use of the mask and arrange for correct washing and drying as per the guidelines issued by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, which you can visit at the website as being provided on this slide. If your workplace has access to the public, social distancing of at least 1.5 meters is necessary. Physical barriers or face shields must be provided to your employees, and screening of people entering your workplace must be done. With regard to ventilation, the employer must keep the workplace well ventilated by natural or mechanical means. Where reasonably practicable, have an effective local extraction ventilation system with high efficiency, which is regularly cleaned and maintained, and its vents do not feed back in through open windows. The employer must also ensure that the filters are cleaned and replaced in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions by a competent person. With regard to personal protective equipment, it is important for the employer to regularly check websites of the National Department of Health, the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, and the National Institute for Occupational Health for any additional requirements. The websites are provided here. It is also important to take note of annexure to the regulations, which you can visit at that website. It sets out a work plan or a workplace plan for businesses that every workplace must have and must be adhered to. So it is important to visit the website and take note of Annexure E to the regulations. Offences and penalties. Any person who intentionally misrepresents that he or she or any other person is infected with COVID-19 is guilty of an offence, and on conviction is liable to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months, or to both such a fine and imprisonment. Any person who publishes any statement through any medium, including social media, with the intention to deceive any other person about COVID-19 infection status of any person, or any measure taken by the government to address COVID-19, commits an offence and is liable on conviction to a fine or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months, or both such a fine and imprisonment. Any person who intentionally exposes another person to COVID-19 may be prosecuted for an offence, including assault, attempted murder, or murder. Any person who fails to comply with an obligation in terms of the regulation that was imposed on them in terms of the regulations, or a direction issued in terms of the regulations, commits an offence and is on conviction liable to a fine or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months, or to both such fine and imprisonment.